Let's talk about the elephant in the room. DOGE gutting Social Security. Hello, members, Super Savers, and Bond Course fans. I hope you're healthy and well. So this is an actual comment from one of you, and we've seen quite a few similar ones from others in our community who are also concerned about the recent Social Security cuts by DOGE and the Trump administration. So with that in mind, here are the three topics that we'll be covering in today's video. 1. Who would be impacted by the recent Social Security cuts and which cuts have actually been confirmed? 2. What else is on the chopping block at the moment and why? And 3. Where does this leave us with Social Security? As usual, here's our front video disclaimer. For a detailed disclaimer, please refer to the end of this video. Let's dive in now, folks. Who would be impacted by the recent Social Security cuts and which cuts have actually been confirmed? According to the Social Security Administration, as of January 2025, there were 73 million Americans receiving benefits. About 56 million of these recipients are aged 65 or older. A bit more than 11 million recipients are disabled under age 65, which includes children receiving supplementary security income based on their own disability. And about 5.5 million beneficiaries fall into this other group, which includes Social Security beneficiaries who are neither aged nor disabled, such as early retirees, young survivors, and so on. 73 million Social Security beneficiaries impacted is a big number, especially when most of us spend our entire working lives paying not insubstantial amounts into the system. No wonder then that many of you have found headlines like this disturbing. From Bloomberg, Musk says entitlements, big one to cut in Trump's DOGE push. And from Democrats.org, Trump and his billionaire shadow president, Elon Musk, want to eliminate Social Security and Medicare. President Trump is pushing back against these reports, and the White House put an official statement on its website that the Trump administration will not cut Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid benefits. President Trump has said it over and over and over again. Now, it's ultimately up to you whether you trust President Trump's assurances for the future, and I know sentiments can be mixed about that. That said, the cuts that have been actually announced up to this point by the Social Security Administration are not related to benefit amounts and will not impact anyone's Social Security check. In fact, from what I understand, instead of a reduction in benefits, quite a few of our Diamond NestEgg regulars have actually seen a nice bump up in their latest Social Security checks from the WEP and GPO changes brought about by the Social Security Fairness Act that the Biden administration signed into law at the end of its term. But of course, that's where the misunderstanding may lie. There are cuts that have been announced so far by the Social Security Administration, but these have to do with workforce reduction and office closures. Social Security recently set a staffing target of 50,000, down from the current level of 57,000. Rumor of a 50% reduction is false. I've linked this article in the first pinned comment below this video, as I know this rumor of a 50% reduction in the Social Security workforce worried some of you here. The article also gives more detail on how the Social Security Administration will reduce its workforce and offices going forward for those of you who might be interested. Now, while not a cut by half, bringing the Social Security Administration workforce from 57,000 down to 50,000 staff members is still a reduction of 12%. And apart from the impact on the affected employees, these operational changes could potentially mean longer delays for phone service, claim processing, and conflict resolution. And office closures might also not be helpful at all if you have a preference for going to your local Social Security office in person. But to summarize, there are two key things to remember here. 1, and to repeat, the Social Security cuts that many of us have read or heard about at the moment are not benefits related. They will not affect anyone's Social Security check. However, there are cuts and they are related to staffing reductions and office closures, as we just discussed. 2, if the goal is to rein in our country's spending and reduce the budget deficit, then we probably will continue to read and hear about more staffing reductions, office closures, and other organizational improvements within the federal government. Otherwise, this U.S. national debt number that we see here, an amount that I think we can all agree is a problem, this national debt number will continue to grow and become an even bigger problem in the foreseeable future and beyond. And any other private or public organization would most likely react in a similar way to a persistent deficit in their accounts. So now that we know which cuts have actually been confirmed and who would be impacted by the recent Social Security cuts, Social Security recipients no, but Social Security Administration staff yes. Let's move on now to the next section of today's video. What else is on the chopping block at the moment and why? Headlines like this one that I showed you earlier, Musk says entitlements, big one to cut in Trump's DOGE push, do not tell the whole story, as we've just explained. In fact, if we make it to just the first paragraph of that same article, we can see that what Musk claims is that Social Security and Medicare are key targets for cuts because the federal programs are plagued by fraud. Meaning that what's being targeted by DOGE, Musk, and the Trump administration, apart from a leaner organization, as we just discussed, is to eliminate fraud within Social Security and Medicare, not the programs themselves. And the numbers that Musk quotes here, savings of $600 to $700 billion a year, support this interpretation, because eliminating these entitlements altogether would save a multiple of that, as he should be well aware of. But more about that later in this video. Now, we here at Diamond NestEgg don't know whether or how much fraud there is in the system for Social Security and Medicare. What we do know is that no institution run by humans and for humans will probably ever be completely fraud-proof. And the government itself recognizes the problem. In the words of the U.S. Government Accountability Office, or GAO for short, essentially the internal audit arm of the U.S. government, no area of the federal government is immune to fraud. We estimated that the federal government could lose between $233 billion and $521 billion annually to fraud. And the GOA then continues, given the scope of this problem, a government-wide approach is required to address it. Now, these statements may seem like they've been put out there to specifically justify DOGE and Musk's effort to go after fraud all over the federal government, except that these recommendations came word for word from a report that the Biden administration published on April 16th, 2024, when the Trump administration was nowhere near the White House yet. And yes, this GAO report explicitly mentions the Social Security Administration and Medicare, as well as Medicaid, as government units who have been collecting data on potential fraud, presumably because they are aware of the risk of fraud in their worlds and want to manage it proactively, which would be a good thing. That said, I'm not going to start guessing how much fraud may have been committed by which means against either the Social Security Administration or Medicare. By its very nature, fraud is a crime that's hard to detect and quantify. You'll always only know after it's been found out, and you never know for sure whether you found everything. But let's just say the potential for fraud will naturally be large in these areas, simply given how much money we're spending there. For fiscal year 2024, Medicare and Social Security were the top two expense items in the federal budget, with Medicare accounting for 16.34% of total spending, and Social Security accounting for 15.91% of total spending. In other words, Medicare and Social Security combined accounted for a bit less than a third of our total fiscal year 2024 budget. And if we add Medicaid spending to the mix as well, Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid together accounted for close to 40% of our total fiscal year 2024 budget. No wonder then that these areas are now a main focus for DOGE, Musk, and the Trump administration, which brings us nicely to the next section of today's video. Where does this leave us with Social Security? So here's what we know so far. 1. The Social Security Administration is cutting staff and closing down offices. but not cutting the benefits of existing Social Security beneficiaries. 2. Nearly 40% of the $9.7 trillion federal budget for fiscal year 2024 was spent on Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. 3. The government's own estimates for fraud committed against itself range between $233 billion to $700 billion per year, and DOGE and Musk are trying to bring these numbers down. Again, this $233 billion is the low end of the analysis completed by the U.S. Government Accountability Office under President Biden's administration. Their high-end fraud estimate was $521 billion. The low-end fraud estimate by Musk is $600 billion, and the high-end fraud estimate by Musk is this $700 billion right here. Our Diamond NestEgg regulars know that I'm of the mindset every little bit counts, and $600 to $700 billion count even more. But the reality is that even if the Social Security Administration is downsized, and even if DOGE manages to find and eliminate this estimated fraud of $600 to $700 billion per year completely, there are long-term structural reforms that will still need to be made to Social Security at some point to keep it sustainable for the long run, such as a higher minimum age for taking Social Security, less generous provisions, and or tighter management of processes. Remember, the last time Social Security started showing a deficit in the 1980s, Social Security reforms were passed along the same lines. Higher minimum ages, stricter requirements, as we discussed in this recent Social Security video here. And it was done with bipartisan consensus. Plus, those reforms worked successfully for many decades until the pandemic hit. Unfortunately, fixes like that tend to happen only at the very last minute. So, in my mind, for those of us like me and Marcus, who are still years or even decades away from meeting the current minimum age for taking Social Security, our best bet is to save for retirement on our own to the best of our ability. Because while I don't think that it's likely that Social Security will disappear altogether, I do think that we will probably have to work until we're even older and wait even longer to get Social Security checks that will most likely be smaller than what the current retirees are receiving. But if you're already receiving Social Security benefits now, based on what we've seen in the past, it is unlikely that any Social Security reform would be applied to current recipients retroactively. As I always say, I don't have a crystal ball, but President Trump has repeated this message often enough. I'm not going to touch Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. Now, we're going to get fraud out of there. So, for the time being, it does appear that Social Security employees in non-mission critical functions, offices, and fraud are what is being targeted, not the actual Social Security check that you're receiving every month in your bank account. How are you feeling about Social Security right now? Drop a comment below and let me and the community know. No one knows what the future will bring, so stay tuned as always to this channel as we keep monitoring events and updating our Diamond NestEgg regulars with the latest happenings. All right, members, super savers, and bond course fans, I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something new. And as always, if you want to learn more about treasuries and bond investing, then check out this video here on our bond courses. And come join our next live member Q&A on Sunday, March 23rd at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, 2 p.m. Pacific Time. We'll be diving deeper into this month's 2, 5, and 7-year Treasury auctions and all things fixed income. I've also linked all the details on our bond courses and YouTube Super Saver membership below this video for your convenience. See you again very soon with more brand new wealth building content for your financial journey.